Coming to you direct from the nerve center of the galaxy's greatest comic. This is the 2000 AD Thrillcast.
Borag Thung, Earthlets, and welcome to the 2000 AD Thrillcast, the first of the lockdown tapes. Unfortunately, we've had to go into isolation since the nerve centre is making sure that we don't spread the coronavirus amongst the human population. So I've retreated to my bunker, as you can see, quite salubrious. But we're still going to be bringing you the 2000 AD Thrillcast, hopefully with more episodes per week than we have before. This week, I'm really pleased to be able to welcome Mike Dorey onto the podcast. He's an artist that anybody who has a love of comics from the 1970s and 80s will know. He worked on Action, Battle, 2000 AD, very well known for strips such as Cadman the Fighting Coward, Roadbusters, did a little bit of Road Trooper, and we had such a wonderful chat. Really lovely guy, and it was an absolute pleasure to talk to him. The reason that I'm talking to Mike is because out this week is the Action 2020 special, which is available from newsagents and comic book stores, as well as digitally from 2000 AD's web shop and apps. If you order it from the 2000 AD or Treasury of British Comic web shops, then you can get hold of a reproduction copy of the banned issue of Action from the late 70s. A beautiful reproduction of a comic that virtually nobody saw because it got pulped because, the cover says commit suicide, so kind of obvious. But make sure you grab a copy of that. It's gone down really, really well. Mike is in there illustrating Helmand of Manta Force, which was a strip that he drew for Action back in the 70s and scripted by Garth Ennis, and it is beautiful. So it was wonderful to talk to Mike about his career, his time working on Action and Battle in 2000 AD, and also his switch over to the world of advertising. Now, obviously, things are quite dark at the moment. Hope you're staying safe and keeping your own family well and not abiding by the rules and not spreading the virus. We weren't quite expecting a dystopia in our lifetimes, but, these things happen. 2000 AD will continue to be published. So don't worry about that. We'll be bringing you more content from the Galaxy's Greatest Comic over the coming weeks to make sure that your self-isolation goes as well as it possibly could. In the meantime, let's crack on with the interview with Mike. Sorry about the sound quality, both from me and from him. Running off a creaky old laptop here in the bowels of the nerve centre. But enjoy. Let us know what you think, and hopefully we'll have more content this week from the Galaxy's Greatest Podcast. Tell me a little bit about how you started, because you were a comic reader as a kid, weren't you?
Yeah. Well, when I was a boy, I used to get the Sun and Comet comics, and my brother got Knockout and something else. Anyway, I could draw fairly well when I was quite young, and I used to copy the comics, and I always wanted to get into doing comics when I was growing up. And anyway, I went to art college, and I had to do a graphic design course, which I actually hated. And after I did a foundation course, that's right, and I did a year of graphic Dip AD, it was called then, and I got fed up. Now I found I could do an illustration course at St Martin's, and St Martin's said they'd accept me, but Brighton had to recommend me, and Brighton said, no, you agreed to come here, so we won't. So I thought, well, bugger that. So I used to argue with the teachers quite a bit. Anyway, they kicked me out after about 2 years. So I thought I'd better, there's something to get kicked out of art college. Anyway, that was Brighton Art College. Anyway, I realised I ought to start trying to get some work. So I worked part-time at Gatwick Airport on aircraft cleaning, and in the evenings I sort of did some work. Anyway, I took it up to Fleetway in Farringdon Road then and showed them some of my work, and they said, yeah, it's okay. You need to get an agent. So they recommended a place called Link Studios. And I went there, and there they had Barry Mitchell, who was doing lots of football stories, and Tony Harding, and Mick Lacey, and various other people. And they got me helping Barry Mitchell on history. He did a thing called the Mini Martins, which were about like the Boreys, little people in sort of a big world. And I think he did pencils, and I did some of the inks. And then I got a story on a girls' comic called Diana, because in those days, the girls' comics, I think they paid a bit less, and usually the good artists all got on the boys' comics. And the ones who weren't so good, apart from some of the foreigners who were bloody good, they were stuck on the girls' comics. Anyway, so I worked for Diana for, I don't know, a few months. And then I was asked to do a job on the Victor. So I started working for Victor, which I've done most of my work was for Victor, for DC Thompson's. And the story I did most of was a thing called Cadman. And I worked out, I've done over 1,000 pages, well over 1,000 pages of that. Because each series ran for about 20 weeks. And I did, I don't know, nearly 20 series. And there were 3 pages on there. So it works out quite a few pages. And then, IPC, what they wanted me to, they asked if I come and work on some stuff. They did action. I don't know if they've seen my stuff in Victor. And so anyway, I went down to, it was in Farringdon Road again then, when Pat Mills was there, and Jerry Finley Day. And I went in and Barry went in and he did a football story, which I think was called Striker or something like that. And I did Helmand. And we worked in the office with Barry, Pat Mills, and various other people. I forget their names now. And that's when I was working on Helmand. And John Wagner was just down the corridor. And he got me to do some stuff on, was it Valiant or I can't remember what it was now, a war story. So I did that as well. And I was working for DC Thompson's, and I was knocking out about 6 to 9 pages a week. And DC Thompson's didn't like me working for IPC because they're big rivals. And so that's when I used that name J. Clough. I don't know if you've seen it on some of the stories. Yeah. It was because I used to use J. Clough for some of the textures. And anyway, it didn't fool anybody. But the one amusing thing was Barry Mitchell, who was, we used to do a lot of work together over various years. And we used to tell Thompson's that we were getting paid X amount of money by IPC. And that, they ought to come up to level. So they said, yeah, okay, they did that. So then we went back to IPC and said, look, DC Thompson's are paying us X amount. And I remember Thompson's are really tight. And they told us, because we were getting more money than the other artists, we were never to tell anyone how much they were paying. So it's like getting blood out of a stone with Thompson's. And they've never returned any artwork. They've got, God knows, hundreds and hundreds of pages up their artwork. IPC, they returned some stuff from 2000 AD. I got some stuff back. I got nothing back from Action, nothing back from Tornado. So I've got quite a bit of original artwork for Road Trooper and some of the Road Jewel story I did. And also I got a lot of stuff back from Eagle. I did Computer Warrior in Eagle in colour. I've got nearly all of that back. So that's quite handy. When I'm really skint, I'll flog some of it.
I mean, that was a gallop about 20 years. So I want to rewind a little bit. Because I just want to focus on the thing about Art College, because we've had loads of guests on the podcast over the last 5 years or so, and that seems to be a recurring thing with Art College of people either being kicked out or not completing or walking away or whatever. Were you going out because you wanted to do comics? Was that the intention, or was it just a kind of you wanted to work in illustration?
Yeah, I wanted to work in illustration. I mean, comics was always my sort of first love, and I was always going to do that. But when you go to Art College, comics is totally taboo. You wouldn't even talk about it. So you talked about illustration. I've done quite a bit of illustration work at various magazines and books and stuff, but I've always really liked doing comics because I grew up doing that and I understood the medium. And I mean, that's why, later on, back in the very early 90s, I got into advertising, doing storyboards, which is just like doing a strip cartoon. So I found it really easy. But it's, I think is, when I went to art college, I could draw better than most of the teachers there. And they were trying to get me to do different things. And that's why I had quite a few rows with them, because there's some of them pretty, what's the word? Thought quite a lot of themselves, and actually they weren't very good. And you had the thing about those you can do, those you can't teach. That was probably it for a lot of them. Some of them were okay, but it's I really enjoyed it when I was being in Brighton as a student. It's really good fun. But it's I just got fed up with it really, and it's the best thing that could have happened, me getting kicked out, because I actually got working sooner rather than sort of wasting another couple of years in art college.
Well, that was going to be my next question: is what you think that what effect do you think that had on your career? Because if I guess if you're mostly self-taught, then kind of going straight into the industry where it's an element of sink or swim. I guess particularly at the time, that's exactly what you wanted to do.
Yeah, well, the thing is, I could draw pretty well, so I knew I would actually get work because I could draw okay, and so I was really very determined to do it. So I jumped in, and luckily it worked out. But when I was working in advertising, you get people coming in studios with their folios and stuff, and you could see they were never going to make it, And you had so many sort of people who want to be artists and illustrators, and they haven't got the hope in hell of actually making a career out of it. And so you've got to be gentle with them. But if you're not good enough, it's a real hard slog, and desperately trying to get work and all that kind of stuff. And I was really lucky because once I got into it, I was just turning work down nearly all the time because I was really busy, and because starting a family and stuff, I needed to earn money, and so I used to really churn the stuff out. So you get someone like Brian Bolland, who's so slow. His stuff is fantastic. I really like his stuff, but he's very, very slow. And I remember there was trouble on 2000 AD because his stuff was always late coming in. And that's why he didn't do a lot of stories to start with, just, interspersed with other people, like Mick McMahon and various other people. But it's really nice stuff, but it's quite laborious, whereas I should just churn it out. So,
wait, paint a picture for me of Mike at age. How old were you when you started work in IPC? Well, Fleetway.
Fleetway. Let me think. Probably about 1920, something like that.
Right. Well, paint me a picture of what Mike was like at 1920. What was your background first of all? That's one thing I am interested in is when he's coming. And what were your kind of real aspirations in life?
Well, I always wanted to do what I did, which is I'm really lucky about that. If I hadn't been able to draw and make a living, I'd quite like to have been a vet of all things. And it's funny because I've discouraged my children from going into art, and they're all quite good. They were quite good, but one of my daughters, she actually went to Chelsea in the Royal College of Art, so she's got a master's and all that stuff, and she would not be dissuaded from going into art, thank God. So she's done really well. Well, she's just come back from New York where she's working on some textile thing, after this coronavirus thing. So she got one of the last flights out from New York on Friday, I think it was. But no, and at school I could draw quite well. Well, I could always draw quite well, and I was determined to get in to be an illustrator, and I really like comics. So the thing is, you've got the drive, and you're confident enough, and you really push for it, you'll get it. Touch wood. And so I was quite lucky, really.
Do you see yourself as I'm not sure if this is the right term, but journeyman. That kind of you're in it for the career. It is a passion, but it's something that you're willing to, as you say, churn out the pages on rather than necessarily take your time over.
The thing is, I always work a lot better under pressure. If I had a lot of time, I'd just sit around twiddling my thumbs, and so the pressure makes me probably work better, I think. And I could never be like Brian Bolland and spend hours and hours and hours over drawing it. Because I prefer to be much quicker and dynamic. That's the word. So no, it's I thought I was working under pressure doing this, but when I actually went into advertising, I remember once working for about 36 hours without stop because you get these deadlines, and in those days I'd get couriers coming to the house like 4 o'clock in the morning to pick artwork up, storyboards for advertising. And I can remember I worked for 2 studios in London, and I'd be going between the 2, and I'd be working one, and I'd get a call saying, "Oh, Mike, can you come up? There's been some more frames they want on so and so." I said, "Oh, all right." And I'd go up Tottenham Court Road to, it was A3. I was doing some work up there. I get a call from Storyboards. "Oh, Mike, can you come back? There's been some changes." I said, "Bloody hell, up and down, up and down." But it's sort of money in advertising is fantastic compared to publishing. And because I've got quite a big family, it was really handy.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and tell me a bit about, because you mentioned about Barry Mitchell, that you started working, well, you were paired with him by Fleetway. Tell me a bit about that working relationship.
Well, Barry Mitchell, as I said before, they got me to, when I first went to Link Studios, I had an agent. I was doing some of his helping him out on his Mini Martins. And the funny thing about Barry Mitchell is that he did football stories almost exclusively. And they were probably the best. I think he was probably the best football artist in the country. And they've all gone about. I think it's Mike White, but Barry Mitchell's football stories are fantastic. His drawing, but some of his other stuff wasn't that great. So he always did football, and I tended to always do war and adventure type stuff. But we both had the same agent at Link Studios, and anyway, the agent got ill after I'd been there for about a year or something, maybe 2 years. The agent, who was Doris White, she got ill, and because I was up there, she said, "Would I mind taking the artwork down to Fleetway?" So I said, "Yeah, okay." So I got to know all the editors down there, and he said, "Why are you bothering with an agent? We know you and we like your stuff, and I'm paying an agent 20% or whatever it was." So I thought, yeah, and Barry Mitchell was the same. So so that'd be good. So we then contacted DC Thompson's and said, "Look, we're thinking of branching out on our own and not having an agent. Is that okay?" And they didn't want to upset the agent because they had a lot of artists working through her. Anyway, they had to negotiate with her, would it be all right, and all this kind of stuff. But we said, "Look, we're leaving anyway." So we did.
I mean, that's what I mean. We've spoken on this before in the podcast. Is that's one of the main differences between the industry now and the industry 40, 50 years ago. Is you look at artists, Barry Mitchell, yourself, Ron Smith, people like that. Everybody worked through agencies, and now, people might have an agent for books or for TV and film, but it's still very rare to see an agent in comic books, and that kind of 1970s phase is when that seemed to properly kick in.
Yeah, well, I think Barry Kelleher was in Barden Art, I think he was called, and he was quite a big agent. Temple Art Agency, that was his. But it was really good because going to the Link Studios, as they called, my agent had a thing that was Link Studios. You actually learnt the ropes, because I knew I could do the drawings and stuff, but actually learning about where to put the speech balloons and being in an environment but I think there were about 5 or 6 other artists up in the studio working, and so you pick up stuff from them about laying out a page and the sizes and all that kind of stuff. And it was really good. Also working with me on helping Barry Mitchell out to start with was a real good learning curve, because you learn about the pressures of doing it and about how to space out the frames. And the thing was, when I started DC Thompson's, they used to have like 9 frames a page or more and loads of text. And it was like a nightmare trying to get action stories in there to fit them in these tiny frames. Anyway, we eventually managed to get them down to like maybe 6 to 8 a page, hopefully 6. And IPC were much better for that. You could do like 6 a page, I think it was. And I used to quite like doing a big opening frame and then squeeze the rest of the stuff in later on. I think that thing I've just done for Rebellion, a Helmand thing for action. The first page of that is a big frame on there with a tank burst. You've probably seen it bursting.
Yeah.
So that's the same for that. But it's funny doing it again after all these years, because I haven't done a strip cartoon for, 40 years?
Blimey.
It's a hell of a long time.
Yeah.
But as I say, we've got some original artwork here in the old comics, some of the old comics I've got. So just look at this. It wasn't difficult to redo it. So.
Well, we'll come on to talk about Helmand and the action special. One thing I wanted to ask about is the evolution of your style, because it has elements of, I guess, lots of other artists that I recognise from the time. You can see a bit of Barry Mitchell in there. it's very rich. You use a lot of nice thick lines. It's very textured. Do you want to tell us a little bit about how your style evolved over time? Did it kind of appear almost fully formed, or is it something that evolved?
No, it did evolve, because if you like the earlier stuff, I haven't seen any of the girl stuff I did, something I did later on. But so the first stuff I've actually got examples of was Cadman, and it's quite linear. The style, there's no texture in it. It's very standard sort of looking artwork. I realised as I was getting more into the stories are quite gritty and quite mean sort of storylines and stuff. So I thought, making it slightly darker. I really like using the J-cloth because I got fed up with doing cross-hatching and that sort of thing. So I found using a J-cloth is quite handy for sort of smoke and shadows and stuff. And so I used my great package of J-cloths. Used to sort of just dip them in the ink and stick it on with that. So that's how I used to do that. But it's...
You see, now that you've mentioned that makes absolutely perfect, because that was one of the things that picked out your work from other people's, was that kind of textured, almost material like, and it was just J-cloths.
Yeah, it's just J-cloths. I quite like doing a dry brush work as well, which I didn't do. The thing is, in those days, the paper was so crap. It's like lavatory paper, and you had to be quite careful. You couldn't do too fine a line, and you couldn't do too many blacks. And if you tried to do dry brush on it, it would have just gone completely black, probably. But with better paper nowadays, it's you can get away with all sorts of things and use halftone as well.
I'm intrigued by the notion of an agency having a studio in which you sat, rather than it being, you're at home and you send your stuff as the industry is universally now. What kind of things was it all comic books, or was it a variety of advertising and illustration and comic books?
No, it was just comic books. And the thing is, the woman who owned the studio was called Doris White. And she was actually did girls' comic stories. She illustrated. She was another artist. And it worked out really well. I mean, they had the things you get annoyed about in those days. You used to have this card, like a Bristol book. It's thicker and much more expensive. And she had drawers and drawers of this stuff. And people would come in and just cut bits up. She used to go mad because the stuff cost so much money. And people were cutting bits out of it. And then she started rationing it. I remember that. But it's there's a lot of people. There's one bloke there called Evald something. He's half Maltese, I think. And he was diabetic. And he used to smoke roll-ups and stuff. And he'd have his needles in this little packet in his art case. They take it out, it's full of fag ash, and it's got needles and stuff. How he never got sepsis, I don't know. He was a Chelsea supporter, and I remember he came back from my game and said about some bloke who got his boat race striped or something, which means he got cut across the face with a knife.
So how long were you at Doris White's studio?
I think it was must have been at least 2 years, maybe 3 years.
Right.
That, because it was. It's good job I went there. I think it was very unusual. That's the only agency I know where they actually had in-house sort of artists. So it was really like a proper studio. When Doris White decided to pack it all in, she was to retire. She tried to do a deal with Pat Keller, who had Temple Art, and the deal was that he would take over her artists. And he tried to get Barry Mitchell and myself to go, and we wouldn't go because we didn't want an agent. And I think he was quite disappointed about that. But why pay somebody 20% when you don't need to? So.
Well, quite. Particularly if you're playing both sides against each other.
Yeah. Yeah.
Brilliant. So, one thing I do want to know about is the girls' comics, because ever since we acquired the IPC archive a couple of years ago, it's been a real revelation reading, well, in some cases rereading the girls' stuff from the 70s and 80s, and just how involved, in depth, beautiful an awful lot of it is, and yet it's still going through this kind of constant turnover of pages, getting the product on the shelves.
Yeah.
How did you did you feel with the girl stuff? Was it an education? Was it just a job to move on to the next stage? You know, what was the experience like for you?
Well, there was one artist working on Diana, I think he was Spanish, a fantastic artist. I forget what his name was. He did the most beautiful girls, and apparently he had 2 daughters who looked like that. I like to remember, but it's anyway. It was just a way of getting into the business. And I obviously wanted to do boys comics, and it was my way of getting into it. And I didn't mind it. The worst story I ever had to draw was for a girls' comic, and it was about you won't believe this. It was a formation dancing team. And they were
I can't believe that.
No, they were eight couples, and they were always doing things like, we want an overhead shot now of these bloody couples they got. And you mentioned 8 frames per page, formation dancing. It was like an absolute nightmare. It was really good training. And funnily enough, I had really good friends up at DC Thompson's. They scout there every now and again in Dundee. Anyway, they sent me down the script. And it started off as a bloke, a tank commander on the Eastern Front. He's been recalled to Berlin for a special job, special task force. Anyway, there are 2 pages of really good script. My God, this is a really good story. Anyway, it turns out they called him back to head of formation dancing team. This is Thompson's idea of a funny joke.
That nicely brings us on to talking about your work on boys comics, because you said you spent quite a lot of time drawing Cabman the fighting coward for the Victor.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about that strip, because it's not one that I know, and I don't know if a lot of our listeners will know it themselves.
Yeah, well, Cabman was based on the Flashman books. But it was like that. But he's based in the First World War. But later on, he actually got into wearing an SS uniform in the Second World War. So he must have been pretty old. But he was like a coward, and he was called the Frontline Coward. And he had a Batman who was a really heroic sort of ordinary guy whose family lived on Cabman's family big estate. And every time Tom Smith, that was his Batman, was going to reveal anything, he said he'd have his family thrown off the estate and made beggars, etc. So he used to blackmail him about that. And there were stories. They started off. He would join the RFC. He was in charge of. He was the one series about tanks, series about running Americans, Cabin on the Yanks, Cabin on the Cossacks, Cabin on the desert, Cabin on the Camel Corps, Cabin in East Africa, Cabin on the Gurkhas, Cabin in the mountains. And each one of these ran for like 20 episodes, 3 pages each. So I could draw it in my sleep. It was good. But then when I started doing Helmand in action, the Thompsons realised they wanted to do a story about a German hero type thing. But there were quite a few old blokes up there who had actually been in the war, so they weren't very keen. So anyway, there's a story in Victor called Iron Annie, but he was a Junkers 52, which is like a transport aircraft, no guns or anything. So it started off on that, and then when he did anything remotely heroic, it was fighting the Russians, never the Brits. So that was their answer to, and then they brought out Kampfgruppe Fulken, which is actually it's a penal battalion, but it was a bit like Helmand, really. I did some of those as well.
Because I guess that brings us on to talking about Helmand of Hammer Force, because he is a German, and he's not just a German, but he's a tank commander. He's actually fighting the Allies. What was your feeling about that? Because as you say, there were people, particularly at DC Thompson, who had fought during the war. You undoubtedly knew plenty of people who had fought during the war. It's still fresh in the collective memory. What were your feelings about drawing strips like Cabman and Helmand, where it doesn't necessarily, it's either not painting the Allies in a good light, or it's actually you're talking about the Germans being the hero of the strip?
I loved it. It's no problem at all. It's well, my father was actually in the SAS in the Second World War, and he knew what I was drawing, and he always thought the Germans were good. The soldiers were good blokes. But it's No, no problem with it at all. I mean, I love the Flashman books. I presume you've read some of them, have you?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, a great character,
Yeah.
and I really enjoyed doing it. The stories were quite amusing, I thought, and I liked. And the Germans got such good uniforms. I mean, yeah, the tank uniform, that black sort of uniform and stuff, much better than the British ones. And the German tanks are much easier to draw than the British tanks because they're got very smooth sides, and whereas the British tanks are bloody awful things to draw, really. That's, but he started, he was actually invading Belgium, and then he did get a fight with some British soldiers, I think, in the first few stories. And then he goes he's in the Africa Corps. He fights the British out and in Africa, and then he goes to Greece, I think, after that. But mainly it was, it got really going when he was on the Russian front.
I'm always fascinated, and this is something that's particular not just to Helmand, but to other strips you've mentioned and to things like Charlie's War, where there is a progression of time. It's not like a lot of the comedy strips, they steal Commando, where it's just in the war. There's no sense of of time passing, but these strips do follow the conflict by and large, whether they're kind of dipping in and out of different arenas, or whether it's something like Charlie's War, it's following one soldier as he is in one relative area. But with something like Helmand, were you conscious of perceptions of Germans and allies, and the Russians being the bad guys, because by that point we were well into the Cold War? Were you aware of stereotypes and cliches about how people perceive different elements of the Second World War?
Yeah, of course. I mean, I've always had a very keen interest in sort of the war, especially the Second World War. So I'm pretty knowledgeable about it, and I was then. It was. I think fighting the Russians, because it was so grim when they were fighting the Russians in the snow, and read some awful stories about what went on out there. It was more gritty and more. I enjoyed drawing it more when he was doing it, and I also, as you said, the storyline was really good because it starts virtually from before Dunkirk, and it winds up in Berlin, when the Russians have got to Berlin, and then somebody did Wagner's Walk, which was actually Helmand, really. I don't know why they probably call it Wagner's Walk. I don't know. It's it's a very good storyline. They were good stories. Jerry Finley Day was a bloody good writer, I think.
Because with Helmand, Pat fought tooth and nail to get Helmand into action rather than being in battle, which I know one or two people who perhaps don't know action, don't know battle, have seen the new strip in the action special, and gone, well, surely this should be in battle. Do you know why Pat was so keen to have it in action?
Well, to start with, was battle going when action came out?
Yes, because battle came out first.
Oh, did it? All right.
Yeah.
Well, I suppose you wanted a sort of cross-section of stories because you had the football, you had the war story, which I did. You had like gangsters, and you had Hookjaw. So there's like a nice variety of stories. Then he obviously wanted to have a war story, and to have something really different and cutting edge. I suppose to have a German fitted the bill.
Yeah. One interesting thing that really strikes me about Helmand is he didn't kill many people. Like he was always trying to protect life, which must be difficult enough when you're writing and drawing a character that's actually in the war, but also he's a German tank commander.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, it was okay once he started fighting the Russians. He could kill as many people as he wanted. But I mean, in the early stories when he's fighting the Brits, I mean, it was going great lengths not to kill anybody, even in the Africa Corps one. So, so it must have been quite difficult to write that.
Did this feel like something was changing? Because action is not just by us but by lots of comics historians is the title where people kind of peg it as this was the moment that comics changed. It had been leading up to this. The war stories have been getting slightly gritty. Then Pat comes along with John Wagner and various other creators, and we want things to be a little bit harsher. The world is changing. It can't be tales of daring do where everybody survives kind of thing. Were you conscious of that at the time?
Yes, I was, because I think Pat Mills probably had trouble with some of the group editors or whatever about what he was doing, because it was quite extreme, something like hook jaw and bits of body parts flying around, and basically, Pat Mills was a more blood, and it's great. It's and they were quite gritty. Some of those stories. All of them were, and he just wanted to make something really exciting and new that was different, because the others were getting a bit staid by then. Sort of Victor and back and stuff, they're just a bit samey, the same kind of things. But his thing wasn't just war, and it's all sorts of stories. Was it Dredger? That was in action, wasn't it?
Yeah,
that's right. Yeah, and I forget what's one. There was a really good Italian art. I think it was Argentinian working on the story, but I forgot what the bloody thing was called. I should figure it out. But I remember when I was working, because I only spent maybe month or two in the office with Pat Mills, and I remember John Wagner was down the corridor, and he came and he got me to do stuff. Was it Valiant? Was he doing Valiant or something then?
Yes, yeah, I believe he was.
Some stuff. I think it's about that sergeant. Was he a blind soldier? Some sergeant in the British Army. I forget what it was called now.
Yeah, I can find out in 2 seconds, he said, optimistically. Stories. Here we go. That's no use at all. That's rubbish. They only list Death Wish and One Eye Jack. That's awful.
Well, maybe it was Death Wish. Maybe it was that.
Death Wish was the guy who had the scarred face.
Yeah, I think it was. And he's a sergeant. I remember that.
Right.
I can't really remember. I've probably got some of the comics out to dig them out and have a look. I should have done that before we spoke.
So with action, you followed action. With Helmand, you kind of followed action for a while. It eventually switched to battle and then got wound up. What do you think about the artists who came after you? Because you did about 4 or 5 months, I think, on the strip.
Yeah. One of them did really weird artwork. It's like he traced photographs or something, because it's really different from anybody else's, and it's very static. There's no real movement in it. I don't know who that was. There's another artist who I thought he's really good. What are the names? What are the names? Do you know the names of the other artists? Something Weston.
Oh, Mike Weston.
Oh no, he didn't work it, but I really loved his artwork. Before I got into it, this was some of the stuff I used to copy. He's a good artist. The artist I really like is Alex Raymond. He did Rip Kirby in America. Really great artist. And in England, John Burns. He's a really good art, I think. Really good artist.
Yeah, still going strong as well. It's incredible.
Yeah, his stuff is fantastic, I think.
Yeah.
And Eric Parker, who I did Victor Drago in Tornado.
Yeah, the weird Sexton Blake.
That's right. Yeah. It was going to be Sexton Blake. Anyway, the bloke who did the original stuff was Eric Parker back before the Second World War, I think it was. Mm-hmm. And his stuff is really, really nice. I like his stuff. But I've tried to get an element of his stuff when I did that story, but it's I enjoyed doing that. But there's no one. Chris Lauder wrote it. He's got a pen name. I forgot what it is now.
What? Yes, he does have a pen name.
It's Adrian something.
Adrian. Well, I'm working from home, and my mind is just gone completely shot.
Whatever it is. Anyway, he wrote really good scripts, but they're a little bit too detailed for me. Like Jerry Finley Day's scripts were really bare bones of what was happening, whereas you get some people who go into all sorts of detail, which is a pain in the arse really, because especially when I first started, you have to follow it, but later once you got more comfortable with things and people accepted what you did. Yeah. So there's another thing. When I first started, you had to send pencils to the editors, and then they would approve it,
Mm.
And then you could ink it in, but that only lasted for about a year, I think it was. Once they knew I could do it, I just sent ink straight in.
Jack Adrian.
Yeah, that's it. Jack Adrian. That's it. Yeah.
There we go. It's kind of handy having my phone here that I can actually look this stuff up as we're going along. I really want to know about the period when you were working in house with Pat and the guys like that, because Pat is very upfront, well known for when he's creating a comic, changing things around, constantly experimenting, seeing what fits. How did you find that? Was it a bit of a hothouse atmosphere?
Yeah, it's all coming back to me now. No, he was a live wire, you could say, and you could say he was really quite manic, actually, charging around and sort of say, "What about this? Do it this way." And that's why he wanted us in house, so he could sort of guide us along what he wanted. And I remember actually they had a Luger and a Colt 45 automatic. They weren't real ones; they were like really good replica kind of things.
Yeah.
They had all these guns lying around. But he was very hands-on. But I think we were the only two artists that were working there, and I forget who the sub-editors were there. I just remember John Wagner being down the corridor. But he was very, like I said, more, more blood, more gore, more darkness, and it's sort of, and the word, more hard line you did, the better you liked it. You say, "Oh, that's really good. I like that." There's something getting their head blown off and stuff like that. So he really wanted to make an impact.
Right. I've just noticed in my notes that Pat Wright was the artist that you alternated with.
I think he might be the one whose work I didn't like.
Oh.
And I think the other one he's done some other stories, and his stuff is really used quite a lot. Do you know what zipper tone is?
Yes, the stuff you used to cut out.
That's right. Yeah, well, I used to use quite a lot. I used to really love it, but he said bloody ages doing it. But he did it as well. But I can't remember what his name was now. No, Mike Weston never worked on action. He was. Right. I forget what he did now.
It's something I wanted to ask about was when. And this goes into the phase that you're working on 2000 AD on things like Robusters and Joe's Dread, where you have alternating artists. So you'll bring one artist in for one story, then next week it'll be a different artist, and then when you get a longer story, you could have multiple artists working on the same thing, so it changes. Yeah. What was your feeling about that? Because as you've already mentioned. Have you already mentioned it? Or was it just the video I was watching earlier? There's a story you tell about when you were drawing Rojaws, and he's a sewer droid, so you drew him dirty, and then next week it will be Kev O'Neill, and he'll be drawing you nice.
And gleaming. Yeah. And it's like I drew him like he's covered in shit and there's flies all around him and stuff like that. And I mean, some of those stories Pat Mills wrote, they were really, really good, really funny. When he has a punch up with some flashy new sewer droid and stuff like that. But Kevin O'Neill used to do them like they were really lovely, just off the production line, so they're all shiny and gleaming and stuff. And the funny thing about Kevin O'Neill, I'm sure I've mentioned it before, is that he just could draw like robots and stuff. And then he did what's the thing he did? ABC Warriors.
Well, that's spun off from Robusters. Yeah,
that's it. No, I mean, I'd never thought much of his figure draw, but he actually got quite good, I think, in the end. But the other one was Invasion, and it's Bill Savage. I mean, I've mentioned this before. I thought he was a real psychopath, and I used to do him with manic eyes and blowing people's heads off. And other people did him like I read somewhere that he's supposed to be. In fact, it was that thing I've got that Rebellion did. The Thrill Power Overload. Yeah, they said that he should be like Stanley Baker or Baxter or whatever he's called. Yeah. Stanley Baker, which he did in the end. The unusual ones, whoever drew him originally, was it Carlos Pino or? Yes, Pino. Yeah. Yeah. Well, anyway, I thought he's a real loony, so that's how I drew him. I think mine looked better actually. So they stories after I finished doing it, didn't they? He came back later on in something.
Oh yes, what? Bill Savage?
Yeah.
We restarted Invasion. We're talking like 15 years ago now. It kind of tied into modern events, so it was kind of a bit of a comment on the occupation of Iraq and things like that. So yeah,
So it wasn't the Volks anymore then.
Oh no, it was still the Volks.
It was like the Volks. So.
Yeah. And don't even get me started on how technically the whole history of that ties into Judge Dredd and then eventually Nemesis. That's
Talking of Judge Dredd, one thing it's I don't know where it came back. I told me about me turning it down. What happened was that they had different artists working on it, and they said, would I be interested in doing Judge Dredd? And I said no, because I thought it was going to be like sci-fi, like Dan Dare or something, because it's all futuristic. And I can't be doing with that. So I actually said no. But it's not that it was offered to me, would you like to judge, you'd be the artist. It was never that. It was just that, when they needed other people's sort of infill and stuff, would I be interested? And I said no. I had no idea it was going to be such a big thing.
Well, it's that's the kind of strip, I was just asking about really, where you have lots of different artists working on different episodes, and the evolution of the strip is really quick. I was recently rereading a lot of those early episodes, and the amount of kind of world building that goes on that is still in play today in Judge Dredd stuff, that was done possibly at the whim of one writer or one artist. That kind of, I don't know. It's kind of like the immunization of the strip again to change, because it can change because it was changing from the very beginning, kind of thing.
Yeah. And when you look at the difference between Mick McMahon's artwork and Brian Bolland's, it's quite incredible.
Absolutely.
And I like the fact that his outfit used to change every now and again, and people did different things. But I think the discrepancy there was Mick McMahon and Brian Bolland are so different. Their artwork is quite good. They're both really good. I mean, Brian Bolland stuff is found. I can understand why the Americans love Brian Bolland stuff, because he's really their kind of artist, I suppose. I don't know how Mick McMahon would go down over there.
Well, he did stuff in the late 80s, early 90s. He did The Last American and things like that. And I'm never sure if the American audience was entirely ever ready for big work. But interesting what you just said then about the contrast between Judge Dredd and Dan Dare, because you did a bit of Dan Dare, didn't you?
I did, yeah.
Is sci-fi not your thing?
No, I mean my second worst thing I ever did after the ballroom dancing thing, ballroom formation dancing thing. Was this bloody thing Manta Force.
All right, okay, yeah.
It was a nightmare. It was actually a toy. There was a link with this toy manufacturer, and it was just quite a big spaceship, and you lifted the lid on it, and there were all these little spaceships, and so all different sorts of spaceships. And because it was linked in with the manufacturer, they had to be dead accurate. And it's like a nightmare, all these little spaceships and stuff. And I don't even like doing space anyway. And that was my second worst story ever.
Well, I would have thought that having done all the war stuff, so you had to get the detail of the tanks right and the right weapons and stuff. I would have thought that would have suited you down to the ground. Or was it just that you were interested in the war and you weren't interested in space?
Yeah, that's probably what it is. And I did some Rogue Troopers, as you probably know. I mean, that was like a war story, really.
Yeah.
It's it's just, I think having seen I always thought of Dan Dare as the sort of archetypal space story. And it was very clean and very linear and very, I could see Brian Bolland doing it. But it just wasn't my kind of thing. And I like Warsong because it's dirty and gritty. And, the tanks I used to draw usually look pretty beaten up, like Road Jaws. Whereas you've got Ian Kennedy, who's a fantastic artist. And his aircraft, I've always copied his aircraft. Even today I'd copy his aircraft. They're brilliant. But when he did a tank, it was almost like Kevin O'Neill. It was like a really lovely, pristine, clean tank. Whereas mine always had dents in them and bits broken off. So, I'll just get rid of this dog. Hang on.
Yeah, no worries.
Right, he's gone. Well, I've got 3 dogs. That's a little one.
All right, fair enough. So with the shift to boys comics, you worked on Helmand, you worked on Action, Battle, 2000 AD. Can you sum up your feelings on the quality of those comics at the time? Because as you say that it was crappy newsprint paper. They were produced cheaply. Up until a certain point, your names weren't even on the strips that you were working on. What was your feeling about your attitudes towards it? Your feeling about the quality of it at the time?
Well, it was annoying, the fact that you couldn't use like halftone on stuff, and you had to be very careful about how fine the lines were, and so you'd be aware that it was going to be degraded once it was printed. So that was, you had you just learnt to accept it after a bit. You couldn't get too fine a detail or anything, which of course suited me quite well. But it's it used to be annoying. Sometimes they'd come out and they'd be too dark. Too many blades. Think, God, you've overdone the blacks and stuff. But as I said, I was churning stuff out. I mean, it's probably 9 pages a week average, and Incredible. So I didn't really. I just, just like a conveyor belt, really. It's it's amazing thing now is that because I've been out of it for 40 years, and I've never mentioned it. With my wife up in Cumbria, and we came across a Leighton International Comic Fest, and we went in there, and somebody realised who I was, and they said, "Oh, it's Mike Dorey." And they said, "Oh, it's Mike Dorey." I couldn't believe it, because I mean, I've been out of it for years, and there's always people, and this is stuff I've done 40 years ago, and so now I've been to a couple of Comic Cons, and it's fantastic. I mean, all these people sort of know who you are. Whereas in advertising, nobody gives a shit. You do the stuff, and nobody cares how it's binned as soon as they've used it. It's one thing I remember. Worst thing in advertising, you do a job, and they say, "What do you think of it, Mike?" And for you, I say, "Well, it's all right." So it's fatal. What you do is you say, "It's the best thing I've ever done. I think it's fantastic," and then that's all they want to hear.
Because I guess when whether you're working for an agency or working on your own, you didn't have that direct contact with the audience that you get now. You can go straight online and immediately see what people think now.
I mean, actually, usually the editors didn't want you to know the thing people thought your artwork was good because they think you want more money. But I did get some letters forwarded from Victor, actually, because I knew all the editors up there. We were good friends, and they're really quite flattering, really. But it's very, very little contact with any readers or anything. It's the fact, because they used to discourage, because they're always worried, especially Thompson. So if they thought you were getting too, people you thought your stuff was too good, they try and get more money out of them. So
with war comics, they were one of the genres that dominated comics through the 50s, 60s, and 70s. And you read the stuff in battle, and it's fantastic. We've still got Commando going today, but it feels like, to a certain extent, the late 70s were the last hurrah of this dominating genre. Why do you think it fell out of fashion?
I don't know. I don't know, really. I mean, the funny thing is, why is it always the Second World War? I mean, you've got all these other things going on, and they're harking back to something before people were born, most of the readers. So even today, Commando, it's nearly all Second World War stuff. I mean, there's been lots since then. And there's some of the Americans said, was it the comic they did called, was it Vietnam or something? Some fantastic artwork about the Vietnam War. And I mean, so many really good things. Like, I wouldn't mind doing one about the Middle East, really, and sort of Baghdad and stuff like that. So it's, I don't know why, though. I suppose in a way, sort of sci-fi, the Judge Dredd and all that sort of thing sort of took it over a bit. And like Computer Warrior, I did. I don't know why. Maybe children didn't. I mean, when I was a boy, I used to read about Dick Turpin and Robin Hood and stuff like that.
I mean, I suppose it could be that with the Second World War, from a British perspective, certainly, and without getting into revisionist history and all this, that, and the other, it's fairly straightforward who are the goodies and who are the baddies.
Yes, that's very true. Yeah, and nowadays you've got to think about all the political side issues and stuff. But it was them against us, against them, etc. So
yeah.
Although funny enough, I remember when I was at college, I remember going to Germany for a while and being in the bar, and this bloke came and said, "Next time it's you and us together."
You mentioned Computer Warrior just then, and I did want to ask about Computer Warrior because it's a title that we get asked about quite a bit since we bought the archive. You know, are you going to do the Eagle stuff? And unfortunately, vast majority of the Eagle stuff we don't own. But with something like Computer Warrior, I mean that was fantastic, because that was plugging into the revolution in all the ZX Spectrum games and all this, that, and the other. How much reference did you do for that? Were you aware of what was happening in computing at the time?
Well, the thing with that was that when it started, you actually had to link it in with some games. Later on, they just made it up. So I had to I wasn't very good at playing these bloody games, and they'd say, "Oh, he's reached level so and so," and it's just. I said, "Well, how the hell am I supposed to know this?" So I think they used to get somebody to screenshot it or whatever and send me down the picture. So I think I'd spend bloody hours trying to get to level 15 or whatever it was. I just didn't have the time to waste on it. But it got a lot better once they decided to ditch the real stories. It got a lot better. But funny enough, at the London film thing, there was a really attractive girl there, and she was dressed as Chung-Li, who was in the character in one of the stories.
Yeah.
I recognised her up. I said, "Christ, are you Chung-Li?" She said, "Yes, I am. She's American." And so I got some photographs taken with her. She's a really, really good-looking girl. But it's, I think it might be that was Street Fighter. That was Street Fighter 2. That was it.
Yeah.
Once it got away from the real games, it really took off. And in the coloured ones, I really enjoyed doing that. So it started in black and white, as you probably know.
Yeah, but I want to talk a little bit more about 2000 AD.
Yeah.
Because you worked on Dread, you worked on Robusters, you worked on Rogue Trooper, various other strips. What was your feeling about 2000 AD at the time? Because you'd worked on action, you'd worked on battle, and here was the successor to both of those things. Again, were you aware that this was something a little bit different?
I was, and I used to go because in those days you used to take your artwork in and give it to the editor. And the thing with 2000 AD that struck me was the people were real fans. People working on it, the artists and people really loved it, and they were all really keen and really into it. And for me, it was actually just a job, because I was doing all these stories and stuff. And I mean, I really enjoyed it, and I thought the stories were great and stuff. But normally, the kind of people like Barry Mitchell and other people I knew, it was a job. You really enjoyed doing it, but you didn't get sort of, "Oh, yeah, it's great, he's doing this, that, and the other." And whereas 2000 AD, they were really enthused about it, sort of, "Oh, Just Dread's going to do this, and so-and-so's doing that." And oh, God, it's I thought it was a little bit over the top, but it was good, because, I mean, that's why it's successful, because people were really keen on it. And I thought the stories, I really enjoyed doing it, actually. I mean, the Invasion, I loved doing that. That was really good. And Road Jaws, Pat Mill's scripts on that was so good. I mean, if you read them, I know Rebellion have done it now. I've got a copy here.
Yeah.
But really amusing stories. I thought they were really good. And there would be little things like, what's the word? Things I did, you call off TV, like some others do have them, and all that kind of stuff. And they worked really well. I loved it. Good stuff.
And in terms of your style and how it changed over the years, going from working on girls' comics, we talked about the transition to the kind of grittier stuff you were doing on boys' comics. As you worked into the 80s, were you conscious of your style changing, or because of the amount of pages that you were putting out, was it remaining fairly consistent because that's how you did things?
Yeah, well, they've remained fairly consistent, but I did actually do a girl's story in colour for DC Thompson back in probably in the 80s. It was called Hard Mercy, and it was obviously a gritty story about like the thing we're going through at the moment, coronavirus. I think it's some sort of epidemic kind of thing going on. And there was this girl who I think was an orphan or something, called Hard Mercy. Her name was Mercy Green, but the story was called Hard Mercy, and it was a girl's kind. It was Bunty or Judy or one of those comics. And so I did actually do a colour girl story back, I think, in the 80s. But that wasn't as, it didn't have lots of J-cloth on it. No, I quite enjoyed doing it. And I did Tupper the Track as well. Do you know Alf Tupper? Do you know the stories?
Yes, yeah.
I did some of that in colour for Victor when Victor went into colour. And that might have been one of the last things I did, I think. So... when that must have been, well, I don't know, very early 90s, late 80s, something like that.
Okay. So you very clearly left comics and switched to the world of advertising. Do you want to describe how that happened?
Well, the thing is, I've actually got 6 children, all by the same woman. We're still married, unbelievably. Anyway, we were down visiting my mother-in-law in Worthing, and it was pissing with rain. And I walked past this bookshop. We went in there, and there's a thing about storyboards, a book on storyboards. I thought, Jesus, I could do this stuff. I mean, some of the stuff was real shit. So I thought, God, I could do this. So I did a few sort of storyboard type friends. I took them up to J. Walter Thompson in Berkeley Square. And they said, oh, yeah, sure, yeah, it's okay. They said, we can recommend some studios you want to go. So I went to studio, and they said, yeah, sure, we use you. And the money was fantastic, but the pressure, because I worked really fast anyway, but churning these storyboards out, and I was actually earning a lot of money on things. So I'm just knocking the stuff out. You didn't do pages, you did like lots of frames. But I really enjoyed it. But it was really, the thing is, it wasn't precious. You'd do it and they'd just bin it. As soon as they turned it to the film director or whatever, that was it. Nobody cared what your name was or anything like that. It was no. It was just really hard business, churning out the artwork, and luckily I did in one commercial break where I had 5 adverts. I had every advert. I had storyboard. I was watching it with my wife, and it came on. I thought, God, this looks familiar. I said, God, I did that storyboard. And the next one came on. I said, shit, I did that. And all 5 adverts I'd done the storyboards for. But then I remember people saying to you, well, what are you working at the moment? Because I was doing so many, I couldn't remember. So it could be Guinness or whatever it was. Just couldn't remember. And then people think, well, is he really doing it? Because just like the comics, I was just churning it out. So
how do you build a career in that kind of industry? Is it kind of word of mouth that, you do a good job on one thing and you're recommended for another?
Yeah, it is. I mean, I worked for 2 studios at the same time. And they had books of people's artwork, and they showed them to the advertising agencies. And they said, oh, yeah, we want this artist here, or whatever. And then once you got known, and the film directors, people knew you and this stuff, they'd actually choose you. I mean, I've worked with Ridley Scott and Alex Proyas and various films. And who's that bloke? Who did Titanic? Well, anyway. He was in Canada at the time, and I was his story, and I was blazing around with him over the telephone, and I told him to get fucked. That's a nice thing when you've got loads of work, you can tell people what they can do.
James Cameron.
Yeah, that was it. I think it was him. Oh, no, was it Hugh somebody? Somebody Hugh, is it? Wasn't James Cameron, it's Hugh something. I can't remember now. Anyway, he was in Canada, and we had a bit of a barney on the telephone. So.
Right, okay. Yeah, no idea. No idea.
Hudson. Is that the director, Hugh Hudson?
Hugh Hudson. Let's have a look.
Director?
Hugh Hudson. English film director, yeah. Lots of documentaries and television commercials.
Yeah, that's him.
So, were you still working traditionally when you were doing the advertising stuff?
No, it's you use magic markers in those days, and you started using Copic markers. So basically what I'd do is I'd pencil it, and then I would just put, sometimes I'd black line it as well, and then I'd put the Copic colours or inks on it. Later on, with computers, you never colour, you do it on Photoshop and on the computer. So, even today, I mean, if I could still do stuff like that, I would actually pencil it. I'll scan the pencil, put it on the computer, and then I'll colour it on the computer. So I'd do it like that. The Helmand I did for Action 2020.
Yeah.
Actually done the traditional way with a pen and brush and that kind of thing. So I really enjoyed doing it, I must say, because you imagine I haven't done it for 40 years, and I've forgotten how much I actually really like doing it. So it's really good. I loved it.
I mean, was it a kind of like riding a bike?
Yeah, it was a bit. Yeah, it's the only thing is that Garth Ennis, his script, he was actually saying what frames went on which pages. Like you say, page 1, there's so many frames. Page 2, so many frames. I've never ever done that. I usually get a script and it's like, say, on 3 pages there might be 18 frames or something.
Right.
And then you decide the breakdown of the frames.
Mm.
And I did change some of his stuff because there's quite a lot of talking heads in that script, I thought. So I did actually change some of the which pages the frames went on. But I've got a low battery warning now.
Oh dear.
Yeah. Do
you want to plug yourself?
No. I mean, how much more do you want to know?
I was just going to talk a bit more about the Helmand strip.
Okay. Well, yeah. Go ahead. If it goes well, I'll get it.
All right. Okay. So, I mean, what was it like returning to a strip that you'd spent, you know, a while doing? It wasn't the thing that you'd spent the most time on.
I really enjoyed it because I always liked drawing Helmand because I like drawing tanks.
Mm.
I based him on Robert Shaw. You know, the Battle of the Bulge.
Yes.
And I mean that because that was that he was like a Helmand character in that film. So that was his face. I based him on that. And funny enough, I was looking something. I got my wife to look something up about Battle of the Bulge, and all these homosexual sites came up with blokes and budgie smugglers and stuff. I couldn't believe it. Anyway, I enjoyed it far more than I thought I would. And Garth and his scripts are very good. And Garth in it before I took it on, he sent me a whole $84 worth of postage it costs. A lot of his books he's done, and I thought they were really good. And I met at London Film Comic Con. I met PJ Holden, who's a lot of his things, and we were sitting next to each other and discussing drawing tanks. And he's saying about how pedantic Garth Ennis is to get the tanks just right and sort of. It's funny considering an ex each other. I've been drawing tanks all these years, and he's just doing it now. So really nice bloke as well.
Yeah, well, I was going to ask, what's it like considering that you said you didn't really connect with the fans of what you were doing in comics until relatively recently.
40 years later, yeah.
Yeah, what's it like working with somebody who has not only been inspired by the work you did 40 years ago, but has built a lot of their career on their love of that stuff?
Well, it's really humbling. It's a cliche. It's fantastic because in advertising, I was in advertising for 20 years, whatever it was. Nobody gives a shit about your stuff. And when I was doing comics, nobody really said how good you were or you loved your work or anything like that. You just got lots of work and you got lots of money. So it's quite incredible to meet people who go on about, oh, yeah, I remember this, and will you sign this? And I was in the comic thing in Enniskillen, and this bloke said, would you mind signing a few comics? He came in, he brought a pile about a foot high. Oh, shit. So I said, okay. Anyway, he came in with another pile. And then some of the other art, they make my mum was saying, we all the bloody well charge for signing these things. Make my mum was at this thing. And I thought, you can't really charge. But I suppose they're going to flog them anyway, but I didn't like charging for it. So, but it's amazing to meet people. Some bloke came up with tears in his eyes, and I couldn't believe it. He'd driven all the way from Cork up to Enniskillen, which is a hell of a journey, just to meet me and get some signed artwork and stuff. It's really, I couldn't believe it. It's incredible. But it was in the lakes. My wife, when we went to the lakes, and somebody said, "Oh, you Mike Dorey," and something. My wife was saying it. Her face was a picture. All these years, I've been churning stuff out. Nobody gives a damn, and she just takes it all for granted. And it's always, "Oh, Mike Dorey, can you sign?" I loved it.
And in terms of yourself, looking back on that career that you had in comics, what are your feelings about it now?
I think I was very privileged because I was doing something I loved doing. I actually got into it pretty easily, really, because I was working at Gatwick Airport, and I then became a shift driver. Then on the shift, the only time you had any work, I was driving a control tower car across the airport. The morning shift, you had to work. The afternoon shift, you put your feet up. Night shift, you used to go to sleep. So I used to take artwork in. And when I was earning enough money from the artwork, I just jacked in the job at Gatwick Airport. So I had a really, really smooth transition. Very, very lucky.
Right.
And I'm blessed really because I've done something I've loved doing all my life, and I love doing advertising as well. It's bloody hard work, but all of it I've loved doing, and I really love coming back to Helmand as well. So if they want to do any more Helmand stories, I'm your man, or Invasion.
Well, thank you to Mike. And I know I say this quite often, but I really hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. It was an absolute pleasure to talk to Mike about his career. And yeah, he's keeping safe. I hope you are too. Stay tuned on the 2000 AD podcast for more content this week as we try to make your self-isolation a little bit more pleasant than it otherwise would be. Stay well, stay safe, take care of one another, Earthlets. Until next time, Splundig Verthrig.
Alert! 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 Fill power levels dangerously high. Alert! Alert! Read 2000 AD every week. Ask your comic book store or newsagent now. Subscribe to the galaxy's greatest comic at 2000ADonline.com.